Let's start by setting up some materials and textures for the eyes. So when I'm doing a character, I just like to get a little bit of the eyes done first. And so let's go in and see how we can do this. So we've got our geometry here that we're looking at. We've also got the 2D view based on what we have selected. And now we're going to concentrate on the eye interior, the eye out, and then also the pupil. And so let's go ahead and choose the pupil first. You can see it's just going to be this piece in there. And let's go ahead and turn off the eye outer so we can see the pupil. And so then everything that we do will be determined by these layers that we create with this pupil selected. And this will determine the color, the roughness, the metalness. All of those things will be determined by how we set up these layers. Right now, there's just an empty paint layer. So what I'm going to do is add a fill layer. And it's going to be this paint bucket right here. This is going to fill the entire texture with whatever we have in this fill layer. And so with this fill layer selected, I can come down to properties. You can see the projection type it's using. You can also see the channels that it's driving. And so we can drive the color, the height, the roughness, metalness, and normal based on the template that we have set up. We don't need to change anything about the normals, and we don't really need the height. So we're going to stick with color, roughness, and metalness. And so this one's going to be really, really easy. We're going to go down to base color, and we're going to click on the swatch and change it to black. Okay. And then on the roughness, we're going to dial this roughness all the way up to 1. And the metalness, we could leave at 0. We just basically want a black hole there. All right. And we can double click on this and call this something like pupil color, whatever we want. Okay. So we've got the pupil in there. The next thing we want to do is set up the outer part of the eye. And so on the eye outer, if we go ahead and click on the texture set, you can see shader instance right here is main shader. I'm going to click on this and choose new shader instance. And it's going to create a copy that's going to be on this eye outer. I also want to come into our shader settings, and you can see we've got main shader copy here. I want to change this from PBR metal roughness to PBR metal roughness with alpha blending. So we're going to go back into texture settings. You can see we have color, height, roughness, metallic, and normal, just like the other material, but I want to add opacity if it's not there already. So we've changed to a new shader instance. We've added an opacity channel. And now we're ready to go on this eye outer. The lighting that Substance is using an HDR image, and it's going to become apparent in just a minute. So same thing as with the pupil. On this eye outer, we're going to use a fill layer to drive the look of this eye. And so we'll go into fill. We've got our fill layer. For the color, I'm going to choose black. Okay. And then we've got height. We don't need the height. We don't need the normal. And I'm going to leave the rest of these. And so now with these active, we can come down and choose what we want this to look like. So right now, this is the amount of roughness that we see. I'm going to decrease this number, which will increase the glossiness or decrease the roughness. And you can see how that gets shinier and shinier. Here's totally rough versus super shiny. So I'm going to make it down way close to 1. Metallic, I'm going to go ahead and increase this a little bit. And you can do this to look. And then opacity, I'm going to decrease this opacity until I can start to see inside of the eye. And so there you can see we're getting this shiny outer coating to the eye. You can see as you change your metalness, you'll start to see less or more of that actual HDR. So I'll leave it maybe at 0.2 or so. The roughness, you can continue to change as well. And you can change your opacity as well. And so that gives us the outer part of the eye. It gives us the pupil. And now we're ready for the inner part of the eye. So when we go to the inner part, you can see as I click on these, all of these layers go away. This is all based on whatever we have selected. These are all driving towards the look that you're seeing on this particular texture set. And so we're going to go to eye interior. So that's the interior of the eye. And so now we'll just start to build things up. And so we know we want the sclera of the eye to be, let's say, kind of a white or off-white. And so I'll add a fill layer. In this fill layer, I will set this to maybe a gray or a white, maybe some yellow tones in it. We can go ahead and get rid of this lower layer here. We can call this something like sclera. And so right now we have the color for the sclera. And so I'm going to create a new layer, and I'm just going to make this another fill layer. And I'm going to make this the color, the base color that I want to have for the iris. And so let's come in and I'm going to go down to color. And on the base color, I'm going to just drop in something like an orange kind of a color. Be a little bit brighter. And let's make this a little bit more of a reddish orange. So something like this. And you can see right now the fill is happening across the entire eye. So what we want to do is only include the color on this part of the eye. So I'm going to come into masking and I'm going to add a white mask. All right, so that is going to show everything. It's like we didn't mask anything at all. And so what we need to do is use whatever means we can to turn this back shell black within this mask. So making sure that we have this selected. And so I'm going to go ahead and just show you how to turn this shell black all by itself. So we're going to come over here to the Polygon Fill. We'll activate this. And if I right click, you can see there are several modes. And so you can see this is Mesh Fill, and then we have UV Chunk Fill. So I'm going to select that one and I'm going to change the color to black. And now all I have to do is click on this shell. And now you can see it's masked out so that the orange is only showing on this front part of the eye. It's not showing on the shell. And so we could come back in here and you can see that orange is now in here. So now when we change the color, it's only going to happen on that shell. So it gives us a lot of flexibility in coming back in and changing the color. Now, what if we want to add some noise to this? So add some patterns to this. We could pipe the patterns into the actual color itself. We can also start blending things together. And so let's go into our procedurals over here in our shelf, and we have some clouds and different noises that we can use. So let's go ahead and let's create a new fill layer, and let's add one of these cloud textures. So this is just clouds 1. Let's go ahead. Instead of dropping it out here, we're going to drop it into the channel that we want to use it on. So let's start with just the base color. So I can drop this procedural cloud onto the base color, and now that's being used for that base color. And you can see again, it's happening across the whole surface. We can add another mask. Let's do it the reverse this time. Let's add a black mask. Okay, now it's not showing up anywhere. And so what we want to do is now go back to our Polygon Fill, right? We're still on UV shell, but this time we want to fill the one that we want to have the detail. So in this case, we'll click on this one and you can see now it shows up. So masking is going to be a really powerful tool inside of Painter. So right now, we're just getting this top layer. You can see if I turn it off, I can see the bottom layer. And so we can now play with our blending modes. We could change the opacity like that. We could also play with the blending modes themselves. So we could multiply it. We could come in and do a screen, soft light, and I think I'll go with soft light on this one. Now, if you're not seeing it, if it's not bright enough for you, you can always go back in to your eye outer and take your opacity down so that you're able to see more of the eye. All right, so you can do something like that. We can also, we'll go back to the eye interior, and we can edit the noise here. So for instance, if we select this and we go down to our base color, you can see there are some parameters in here. Here's the noise parameters, and one of them is scale. So we could increase this scale amount. You can see how that changes things. We can also, up in our scale here, we can change this, which will make it smaller. We increase the scale amount. If we want to paint over this, we could create a completely new layer. So let's create now a just paint layer. So that's going to be the paintbrush. Now there's nothing in here right now. And so what we want to do now is choose our paintbrush. Right now we just have a regular brush. I'm going to right click. I'm going to change the size of it. And I'm going to come down and say what I want to affect with my paint. It could be anything. So I don't need to paint normal. I'm not going to paint metallic or roughness. I'm just going to paint color. And on the color, I'm going to choose black. So I want to kind of darken in some areas. And so now we can come in and we can start to drop in some color here. Now, I want the size not to be determined by my tablet strength. And so I'm going to go ahead and choose that. And I'm just going to draw a line around here. And you can see that that black line is also overlapping onto the sclera. And that's okay. I'm going to do that. And then I'm going to decrease the size. Maybe not that much. And I'm going to come in and draw around the center. And you can see I'm not really worrying too much about being exact. And so we'll just get something like that. All right. So now I want to blur this and I want to take down the effect of it. And so what we can do is start to add filters to any of our layers. So we'll go in here and add a filter. It's on this particular paint layer. Down here, we'll choose filter, and I'm going to just start typing blur. And that'll give me several options in here, and I can add a blur. Now we can blur any paint on this particular layer. So we'll increase the blur intensity. You can see that happening there as it's kind of blurring things out, right? So I just want to increase that to something like this. Then I can also take the opacity down, and that will let me just darken up those areas. And you can see the effect as we do these things over here. You can back out and kind of see how that's looking. And just doing that gives you a nice effect there. And so we can also start to draw in some lines here or extra details. If we want to create some rings and things like that, we can start to do that as well. You can start to see how we can quickly build up a very flexible workflow, because we can come in here and just click on this layer, change the color. We can brighten up the entire eye that way, or we could change it to more of a yellow, and all of that detail is still in there. So working in Substance Painter is really cool because it's so flexible. Instead of painting a texture in Photoshop and having to go back and edit it, we're working with a bunch of layers, and we only output the final textures at the very end. All right, so let's go ahead and get the eye in a position. So something like that. And then in the next clip, we'll come in and start to build the base for the skin. So we'll do that next.